Well, we're looking at the prophetic literature of Israel insofar as it relates to the issue of biblical theology and wealth and money. And you don't have to go very far in the prophetic books to see that the nexus between the godly and doing well, prospering, is broken. In fact, the searing indictment of the prophets is that those in Israel who are the most wealthy are also the most corrupt. They are also the ones who are the most idolatrous and have no concern for God. So the very prophetic literature is pointing to the fact that the covenant relationship with God is broken, yet the curses that would seem to be coming on those who break covenant haven't arrived yet. The wealthy are still being wealthy and they're still being ungodly. Now, I'll read a couple of chapters or a couple of verses that deal with this from Isaiah, because Isaiah really kicks this off with a blast. He says in chapter 2, "Their land is filled with silver and gold, and there is no end to their treasures." So they're doing well. Their land is filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. So they're also powerful politically and militarily. Their land is filled with idols. They bow down to the work of their hands. How can these things be? They're not bowing down to the one true God who is the maker and owner of everything. They're not bowing down to him at all. They're bowing down to created things, yet they're doing well. And later in chapter 5, there is this indictment against the wicked. Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but one bath, and a homer of seed shall yield but an ephah. In other words, there are people in Israel who are buying up properties, buying up houses off the people who are poor, putting them off the land, putting them out of their houses, and creating a big estate for themselves. And Isaiah says, your time is coming. There's a time coming where no matter how much land you have, and no matter how many crops you have, they won't yield enough for you to eat. So what he's saying is, don't think that God has forgotten the covenant curses. Just because you're wealthy now, it doesn't mean to say that God is forgetting his covenant relationship with Israel and that he's going to neglect to bring judgment on you according to what his covenant actually said. Now this goes on through many of the books of the Bible in the prophetic literature. You see this breakdown in Israel of godliness and this huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. And what you get then as you go into books like Amos, you see a clear indictment of the people for the way they behave. It's not just that they're living in, rich and they're doing what they want, but they're actively treading down the poor. They're not actually caring for justice. So in many respects, they are not even reflecting what God is like in any way. So here's some verses from chapter 2, verses 6 to 7 of Amos. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. Those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, and turn aside the way of the afflicted. And that's a key indictment. And then in chapter 4 it says this, hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on the mountain of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, bring that we may drink. The Lord God has sworn by his holiness that, behold, the days are coming upon you when they shall take you away with hooks, even the last of you with fish hooks. So the whole issue in the prophets is that there's a gathering storm cloud of judgment. Now, part of the issue is that judgment is being delayed. As we saw in the wisdom literature, there was this quid pro quo understanding that if you did well, that was because you were being godly and God was blessing you. Here we see that people are storing up wealth for themselves, but at the same time they're storing up wrath for themselves, that a day of judgment is coming. Now we know that day of judgment did come in the form of first the Assyrian Empire taking over the 10 tribes of Israel and dispersing them, and then ultimately Judah and Jerusalem are destroyed by the Babylonians, and all that wealth is taken away and the people are taken into exile. And when they return from exile, they are, as we saw in the history books, they are slaves to the superpowers for the rest of their existence, and they are comparatively poor compared to what they had been. The tension, of course, is that the promise in the prophets is that a time will return when they are wealthy and prosperous and doing well beyond their wildest dreams. That after God has judged them, he will bring a period into their lives that will continue forever, in which the wealth that they had before seems as nothing. The problem with that, of course, is that they never experienced that. We know that when the temple was rebuilt after the exile, there were old geezers crying because the first temple that they'd seen before the exile was so magnificent and this one was rubbish. And the young people were crying because at least they had a temple again. But the old people got it right. There wasn't a magnificent temple like there had been in Solomon's time. There was just this tin pot shed, basically. So what happens is that the promise of blessing in the prophets that's coming seems to be more magnificent than they could even ever hope to have in reality. Listen to these words from Isaiah chapter 60, famous words. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. And nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together, they come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be carried on the hip. In other words, there's going to be a population boom. There's going to be an increase in people. You're all going to come flooding back to Jerusalem. And as we know with cities, people flood into cities when they're doing well. The cities are doing well and prosperous, and they scatter, they leave them when they're not doing well. Just think of the difference between somewhere like London and the Rust Belt city of Detroit in the United States. It goes on in Isaiah to say this, They shall see and be radiant, your heart shall thrill and exult, because of the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. They shall bring gold and frankincense, good news, the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you. In other words, there's this great picture painted of a time of blessing that it seems that is exorbitant beyond anything they've ever had. Yet we know, as we go through the prophetic literature, that the promise never matched the reality. And we end the Old Testament with a great tension. If all these promises are true in the Old Testament, that there's going to be a time of great blessing, how come they aren't experiencing that? What is still to happen that would change the difficult straits that they find themselves in into this great promised time that God is calling them, saying that they're going to have? And that's where we come to with the arrival of Jesus.